it's 10 o'clock. We're going to go ahead and get started on time this morning. The purpose of this meeting is to share information about encumbrances and expenditures, contracts that have been awarded, changing needs in the community, and projections of future need, and to engage the public in a debate about how future coronavirus aid, relief, and economic security, or CARES Act grant money is spent. Diane, can you please call us to order?
Yes, ma'am. I'll call the roll. Councilmember Dunaway.
Present.
Councilmember Days.
Here.
Councilmember Gray. Councilmember Gray. Is she not with us?
Well, I know she's not going to be with us for the whole meeting, so maybe we can just call it a quorum and move on.
Okay, I'll have her as absent for now.
The committee takes official. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Diane.
No, you said we have a quorum. Excuse me.
I'm sorry. I took it from you this morning. I'm a little out of practice. It's been a couple of weeks.
Yes.
The committee takes official notice of and admits into evidence all St. Louis County ordinances and resolutions. Good morning, everyone. It has been a very busy 2 weeks since we last met to discuss oversight, and there is a lot to cover this morning. I'd like to begin with some highlights before I hand it over to Cora Walker for the County CARES team presentation. I'd like to start by acknowledging some of the frustrations we are all feeling with the Small Business Relief Program. Let's try to remember that this is a great policy initiative. The Small Business Relief Program is intended to provide grants to our hurting small businesses who are desperate for this lifeline that we've promised, and this is money that they are not going to have to pay back. But we have a process, and through that process, we are required to comply with federal law, and it is cumbersome. Chapter 200 of the Code of Federal Regulations requires tax ID numbers, W-9s for solo businesses, DUNS numbers, and NAICS Code of Business numbers, numbers of full-time employees, and detailed line item budget of COVID-related business interruption and reopening costs, in addition to the charter number from the Missouri Secretary of State and Missouri tax ID number from the Missouri Department of Revenue, among other things. And to be perfectly honest, I don't even know what all of that stuff even means. This is a lot of detail and information that smaller businesses are not going to have right at hand. And it's taking a lot longer for us to get this information returned before we can cut checks. Because if we fail to comply with the federal regulations on the front end, we could be in the position of having to ask for this money back or trying to cover our own budget shortfalls later in the year. It's not a good situation. I understand that, and getting information is challenging. But there are a lot of people working very hard in the midst of this public health, humanitarian, and economic rescue crisis to ensure that we are complying with those federal laws. And a lot of these folks, let's be honest, are still a little bit scared of making a mistake and are working extra meticulously to make sure that every T is crossed and every I dotted after witnessing the epic downfall of their last boss, whose relationship with rules and regulations was slippery at best. Nearly $1 million have gone out the door, and we've got 19 million more to follow. We are continuing to work with the County CARES team to understand how this policy is being executed. And it turns out that these federal regulations are making the process impossibly cumbersome. And with our limited resources and our people pulled in a million directions, it is taking far longer than we want and that our businesses need. We also understand that folks really want to make this political in this awful election season, and that our small businesses are desperate for this lifeline. But the policy here to support our small businesses with grants that don't have to be paid back is still a good one, and one we will continue to fight for until every grant is funded to every St. Louis County business that is eligible. Before we get into the presentation, I'd also like to update everyone on a couple of new priorities in our humanitarian relief budget. In a recent NAACP poll, 80% of those polled preferred to hold off on ending lockdowns to ensure safety for the boosting of our economy. and that public schools should not reopen until all CDC protections and indicators are satisfied. What we're talking about here is symptoms, case numbers, numbers of hospitalizations, hospital readiness, and community spread. However, if schools do reopen next month, as many school districts are planning to do, I believe that it is our responsibility to ensure that every child in St. Louis County has quality, equally accessible public online programs for parents who are not comfortable sending their kids back to school under these circumstances. And because this pandemic is exacerbating pre-existing structural race issues in education, this committee and the county cares team are committed to addressing the digital divide in homes and schools, as well as the greater likelihood that children of color will be reported to truancy officers for failing to show up for school. For these reasons and more, we are dedicating $4 million of our humanitarian budget to closing the digital divide and ensuring that every child in St. Louis County has access to the technology and support to attend school equitably virtually this fall. We are going to work with superintendents and teachers to find the best way to fund these gaps and make sure that we get these funds to the places and people most in need, as opposed to those with the loudest and most organized advocates. In addition, with cases of domestic violence increasing in propensity and magnitude and less reported than ever, we are designating an additional $1 million in humanitarian aid services for survivors of intimate violence and their families. For some context, $1 million constitutes a 25% increase in the state's annual budget of $4 million per year for domestic violence prevention and protection and services. Shelters are trying to social distance, which means we're running out of space. We need to help find additional space for survivors and their children. We hope to use this $1 million to provide improved capacity for teleservices, technology access for survivors, and to give crisis helplines texting and chat capabilities in addition to the phone lines, which is all they currently have right now. And we also hope to raise public awareness about the availability of resources available to survivors and those in domestic violence situations, including children who are attending school this fall in virtual learning environments. This is a lot of good news and a lot of great policy that we are going to get out the door as quickly as we can. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Cora Walker to update us on with your County Cares presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Good morning, and good morning to members of the committee as well as other council members who may be on this morning. Faith Walker, and I am the Director of Policy for the St. Louis County Executive, Dr. Sam Page. I'm going to dive right into programmatic updates. As the chairwoman mentioned, there's been a lot of activity and a lot of things that are going on. So I wanted to just jump right into where we are with the various programs. So a couple of weeks ago when we met, this is where we were in terms of number of cases and the spread and impact and prevalence of COVID-19 in St. Louis County. I wanted to compare that from 2 weeks ago yesterday to where we are 2 weeks ago today. So as you can see, the numbers are continuing to rise and COVID remains a challenge for St. Louis County as much as it is a challenge for our nation. Now, what we've seen so far just in these numbers is that the cases that are rising are particularly among 20 to 29-year-olds. And the thought is that this is most likely due to work exposures and or social exposures, possibly. That's secondary, but it's still common. And there is just really a dedicated team of people, including over 300 staff and volunteers in the Department of Public Health who are working on contact tracing to try to make sure that many of the gains that we were able to make by the early action that was taken is not lost. Additionally, DPH is working on addressing what we discussed during the last Oversight Committee hearing regarding system delays, delays in reporting of positive tests that are sent to the department from private labs, as well as making sure that we are able to continue to process tests internally through the partner that we've contracted with. Additionally, DPH is partnering with schools and school nurses to work on the back to school planning that's occurring as we speak, and as Councilwoman or Chairwoman Days just mentioned. And then finally, masks, posters have been made available for businesses who want to inform their customers of the mask mandate before they're able to enter. So those are some of the primary highlights from DPH. Additionally, DPH has had a couple of expenditures that have occurred since we've last met or are in the process of moving forward with expenditures. There's a drive-up testing tent that had been purchased just because it was damaged due to weather. There's also final contract work on the prevalence investigation that has been budgeted for $2 million. An invitation for bid is also being prepared and is in review for additional test kits and laboratory services. As you saw from the numbers I just showed, we're going to need to continue to engage with partners and vendors to purchase test kits and lab services as the prevalence of, and as COVID remains so prevalent in our community. In the next week or so, you can also expect the Access to Care application process to be announced. Just as a reminder, that was a $7 million allocation that included $2 million in support for mental health wellness and mental health services, as well as $5 million to support certain community groups and organizations that are helping people get access to the care and the services that they need to deal with COVID and address COVID. And we've also been, and the Department of Public Health has also been in communication with our area community health centers and federally qualified health centers, and has worked to dedicate a funding stream of $2.5 million to add to their testing capacity as we move forward with COVID. Finally, there's been a lot of purchases on with masks for the community with PPE. To date, there have been over 2 million masks that have been distributed in St. Louis County for the residents of St. Louis County. So that continues to move forward. And again, that's one of those areas that is going to be something that is an ongoing sort of a process in terms of acquiring those materials. Are there any questions related to the public health update? All right, great. Well, I will move on.
Yes, I do have one, Madam Chair. I'm sorry, I was unmuted, whatever.
Councilwoman Days, the floor is
Yes,
yours.
thank you. I'm concerned with the return to school. Do we have sufficient PPE for all the school districts, for all the children that will need that, as well as the support staff? If you're going to reopen the schools, That's the first thing. And then the second thing I wanted to ask about was, are there going to be any kind of testing for the children? Any kind of temperature test? How is that going to roll out? Is this a premature question, or is this the appropriate time to ask that?
I mean, I'm able to answer now, Chair.
Okay.
If it's okay for the Chairwoman. Yeah, so I can give you some information about that. So to date, there have been approximately 80,000 masks that have been distributed to schools in 9 different school districts throughout St. Louis County. Additionally, there have been approximately 230 thermometers that have been given to schools throughout the county. And the Department of Public Health is continuing to work with superintendents and school districts to determine what their needs are and how best we can support them and what their needs are related to masks, PPE, and thermometers. But this is something that is existing right now and it's ongoing, and we're prepared to support them in whatever way they determine is that they need our support.
Okay, well, thank you for that. As you move forward with this, many are looking at this as children returning to school, but children returning to school will also have to go home. When they go home, if they have any kinds of symptoms or whatever, and they're in school, they're going to go home. They're going to transmit that to others in their homes, which means that it's a domino effect. So I really want to make sure that the leadership team is cognizant of how this is not just about going to school. This is about the ramifications of what's going to happen once those children leave the school. Sure, in the school you're going to be, I guess, okay, but also consider that probably the folks that are going to have to, children that are going to have to go to school, their parents are going to be the ones that have to go to work, because this is their means of taking care of the children while they are at work. So I just want to make sure that you all keep that in mind as you move forward. It's not just about them going to school. It's about the residuals and the domino effect that will happen once these children return back to the community.
And Senator, thank you so much for bringing that up. And that actually is a perfect segue into the next section, which is the humanitarian section. So we can talk a little bit more about many of the wraparound services and supports that we are funding right now, or the agencies that are able to provide those wraparound services and supports that we are funding through the humanitarian relief portion of our response that absolutely does address the issue that you just raised when it comes to the fact that kids, it's not just about schools, and that kids are going to be leaving and going into the community, and kids rely on schools for so many things, and so many of their basic needs like food, and so on. So thank you for raising that, because that is really a perfect segue into this next section. So just as a reminder, the humanitarian group has been working on providing funding and support to agencies and organizations in a couple of key areas. As you all know, one of the first areas that we announced funding for and made available was for food distribution and food insecurity. Really, Senator, to your point, with the recognition and the understanding that so many children and kiddos depend on schools even to get meals, and that if schools were not going to be reopening or were shutting down, which was happening, early on in all of this, or which is what happened early on in all of this, that there needed to be support to address food insecurity. Additionally, the humanitarian group also established the policy that We would also focus on housing and homelessness prevention, social and emotional support for children, providing services, support, and food for seniors and folks that are homebound, and then finally, childcare, again, to your point, Senator. And so that is something that we've been working on over the past several weeks now. And so just to give you a bit of a just breakdown of the timeline for that and what happened and it has happened with that. A little over a month ago, the RFP for folks to apply to these 5 areas: housing stabilization, social and emotional support for children, homelessness prevention, senior and homebound services, and technology. That RFP was released on June 3rd. Applicants had about 2 weeks to submit proposals in response to the RFP. And then there was another 2-week period of review that was conducted by both external reviewers in the community as well as internal professional staff. And then notifications of awards went out on Wednesday, July 7th. So a day or so after we had this last hearing. Overall, out of the applicants that we received, there were 87 total that got funded, and 80 organizations that were funded as well. Sorry, let me pull it back here. And so this is a breakdown of where we ended up in terms of the funding. So there was about $7 million total awarded in the housing stabilization and homelessness prevention, very close to the $1 million total awarded for senior and homebound individuals. We came right up on our award for the social and emotional well-being of children, and then also got pretty close in the award for technology at right at $1 million. And so, to your point, Senator, a lot, if not all of these things are somewhat connected to school. If kiddos don't have a home, then how can we expect them to do virtual learning from home? If kiddos don't have the technology to do the virtual learning, then how can we expect them to learn? And then one of the things that we heard from folks in the community, as well as from, and I'm going to go on to the next portion here because it all relates, as well as what we heard from childcare providers, is that all of what's going on with COVID, everything that's happening is going to have a social and emotional impact on children. And so that was something else that we wanted to focus on funding. And so we got close to 98% of the total $9.5 million that was initially allocated in funding for those 5 previous areas has been awarded and is in the process of being dispersed and going out of the door. In addition to getting the monies awarded and out of the door, the group of folks in the Department of Human Services and Children's Services Fund are working on communications around the sort of services that are available to people with this funding. Really just getting the word out and being sure to let folks know that there's help and there's support that is available. So that's certainly something that we would appreciate working with you all on the council on, as well, obviously you all on the Oversight Committee on, to help us get the word out about these resources that are going out of the door and into the community. Additionally, during that time and during that process, there was the announcement of $5.9 million that was made available for childcare providers. Again, if we've got a whole bunch of folks that are working or having to go back to work, with schools being closed, there's really a need for just, there's I think a growing need and a growing recognition of the need for investment and support in childcare. That application closed a week ago, and total number of applications that were submitted for that were 107 for a maximum amount of $1.8 million. The documents that are needed from the applicants is currently in the process of being reviewed right now, and recommendations for what each applicant would receive in terms of an award is going to be happening within the next week or so. Because of the number of applications that were submitted, so 107 total, we did an analysis and looked early and realized that there were about 400, give or take, licensed childcare providers that were doing business and that were located in St. Louis County. And so again, we think that as the word gets out more, as folks start to actually receive their checks, that as people are still trying to figure out kind of what they're going to do with the shifting environment as it relates to schools and returning to schools, that there's certainly going to be more of a need for childcare and support for childcare, and more applicants and childcare providers who would be applying for the support and the award. So we're considering opening up a second round of this process over the next couple of weeks. But again, right now we've got 107 applications that were submitted. You know, one of the things that we noticed about the childcare providers who were applying to the program or who were even looking into or considering applying for the program was that many of them are small businesses. Many of them are like small businesses or are actually small businesses and don't have a lot of the sort of access to help for applying for something like this childcare program, who might not have, you know, access to accountants, lawyers, that sort of a thing. And so, as I mentioned in the last Oversight Committee hearing, we worked with Childcare Aware as well as United for Children, so two agencies and organizations that really do, or associations that really do work with a lot of childcare providers in the area to provide technical assistance to help the childcare providers work through the application process. What we are also in the process of doing, or what the Department of Human Services and Children's Services Fund is also in the process of doing, is working with United for Children, or considering working with United for Children and Childcare Aware to provide technical assistance for the reporting and compliance portion of this. So basically to continue to provide ongoing technical assistance for these childcare providers, many of whom might not have some of the technical skill. And so this has just been, I think, a really important kind of ongoing relationship that we have developed with everyone, and especially in the childcare space. And again, to your point, Senator Days, we recognize that childcare is going to be a growing and even more important sort of an issue moving forward. And so we're trying to do everything that we can to support the providers and make sure that they can access the funding. So we are going to continue to provide the technical assistance as necessary so that we can maximize participation in the program.
May I ask a question here, Madam Chair?
You may. The floor is
Thank
yours.
you. Thank you. You mentioned that you have 107 applications for the child care monies.
Right.
And you also mentioned, I thought I heard approximately 400 facilities located in St. Louis County.
That's right. The number that we figured that we got was about 400 total licensed child care providers, give or take, licensed child care providers in St. Louis County.
Well, my point in saying that is that's a big difference there. That
Absolutely.
means that there are a significant number of people either don't know about it or have chosen not to do that. I can't believe that a facility would choose not to apply if they have a possibility of getting some funds for their facility. So how is the word getting out to the others of that this is a possibility of funding for your organization, for your facility?
Can I jump in for a second, Cora? I'm sorry for interrupting.
That's
Some
fine.
of the child care providers that I talked to, Councilwoman, because this program only applied to child care providers who did not get PPP money from the federal government, a lot of child care centers had gotten that and were disqualified from this program. Now, I'm not suggesting that all 300 and whatnot missing child care centers and child care providers got PPP, but I do know that several that I spoke with didn't even apply for this because they were disqualified from the outset.
I see. Thank you. That helps me.
And
thank you.
I'll just add that we certainly recognized that the level of participation that we were hoping for didn't match, like you said, Senator, that there was really a gap. And so that's why we tried to reach out and talk to folks and figure out what was going on. One of the big things that we heard was just the application itself was appeared cumbersome and intimidating, for lack of a better word. And so that's why we knew that we needed to make sure that we were providing the technical assistance to the providers to walk them through the application. And then also we think that by ultimately making available technical assistance for the reporting components of this, that can help alleviate some of the reticence that many of the child care providers have about participating in the program.
And you also,
finally, I was going to just talk about the communications part of it. So so we have shared ads in certain newspapers, periodicals that we know reach a lot of the community. One of the things that we know about this segment or this group of the sector of the industry and these group of providers is that they are largely African American and largely women that are represented in this area. And so we really tried to target media outlets that we knew would reach them, as well as worked with Child Care Aware and United for Children, which again, like I said, has kind of this list of all of the applicants to let them know what was available, let them know that the technical assistance was available. And then, we also just relied on our networks, folks like you to get the word out. And so I think our hope is that as more providers start to see checks going out of the door and to support childcare, then when we open up the additional round of funding, or if we open up an additional round of funding, which I think we will, they will be, like I said, less hesitant to participate. And if we let them know that we've got TA available, we hope that that'll help address some of it as well. But no, we certainly did notice that early on, and we want to try to get the money out of the door because this is, it's an entitlement program more or less. If you're a child care provider and you have a certain number of kiddos, then you're eligible for this specific amount of money.
Cora, I have a question too
Yes.
about this. Because we still have, over $4 million in this pot, I'm wondering if there might be a way to collaborate more with matching services. I'm thinking like, care.com and other organizations that match parents looking for childcare with childcare providers. I'm wondering if there's a way that we can subsidize working families to help make childcare more affordable with some of this money. I know you can't answer that this week. I just want to throw it out there.
Yeah, I appreciate that you raising that, and that's certainly something that we considered early on when designing this program. What we heard from the providers and really parents is that if you don't have any place to send kids, it doesn't matter how many subsidies you give parents if there's not like a place to send the kiddos, and there has been CARES Act money that has gone to the state that is supposed to be, some of it which is supposed to be designed to provide subsidies to parents, and so we kind of run into that compliance issue again. So it was, we thought about doing that as well, but based on what we heard from the providers and the sorts of experts in the community, parents included, this was the wisest source of or allocation of this particular stream.
Great, thank you.
That might have changed, and so we can certainly look at and see kind of where we are now, and we're happy to do that. So now I'm going to go ahead and switch over to the economic recovery part of the presentation. Like I said, I think that we recognize that many of the childcare providers, for instance, are small businesses and what that constitutes. But obviously, and we all know and are familiar with the fact that there are a lot more small businesses in St. Louis County that needed support. And so I'd like to talk about that a little bit as well. So this is where we are now, or where we are now in terms of awards that have been dispersed, checks that have gone out of the door in the last 2 weeks. So a little under $1 million total. There's also been kind of, in addition to that, or as part of that, there's also about $3 million that's in process right now, meaning that applicants in each of those districts have received some notification of their award, but they're just in the process of reconciling any sort of discrepancies in the amount requested and the amount that should ultimately be allocated, and making sure that all the other sort of I's are dotted and T's are crossed, if you will. Additionally, this morning we got notification that there's been another batch that has been sent to St. Louis County, and we have, out of that batch, 125 applications that are ready to go, meaning that the amount that was requested and the amount that is approved as to be allocated are identical, and that total is about $1.7 million. And another, I think it's there were 277 total that were sent in this new batch, and so out of that 277, 125 were matched, and that amount of $1.7 million. So we are continuing to work through the process and work through trying to get checks issued and out of the door. And I will pause because I'm certain that there will be questions, or there are questions about this.
Well, I want to stop you anyway because Councilwoman Gray has a question, and I'm so sorry that I did not see that. Is she even still with us?
I don't see her as part of the panelist.
Okay, all right. I knew she had to leave early, so, okay.
Hey, Madam
does
Chair,
anyone
I do
else-
have a question.
Councilman Fitch?
Thank you, ma'am. Cora, I noticed in your slide there in District 3, 57 awards in process, 21 have been dispersed, and I heard earlier the chairwoman say $1 million is out the door. Does that mean the businesses have this money in their hands as we speak? Because I'm not aware of any of the awards in District 3 that have actually received money.
Yeah, so Councilman Fitch, I will certainly I will try to answer that. I mean, we send the checks out. I don't know if they've received them, but I can say that they've been dispersed. They have been mailed. We don't have any sort of way of knowing if they've actually received them.
Well, what I would like to have, we've been asking.
I don't think that they send the checks certified mail unless I'm mistaken. There are some folks that are on that can talk more about the process regarding this, but
we've been asking for a list of the businesses that have been sent money, either electronically or hard checks, and haven't been able to get that because I'd like to call those.
I'll get it to you. Yeah, I'll get it to you by the end of this meeting. That list has been provided to the Oversight Committee members. I'm sorry I didn't provide it to everyone, but I can certainly get you the list of businesses that make up this list of 56.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions?
I do have other questions specifically about this program. Is this the right time to ask?
I believe so, but we can certainly give it a shot.
Certainly. We got a call from one of our businesses that said the hotline is now telling people to email their questions, that they're no longer taking hotline questions. Is that accurate?
So it's my understanding, and again, this is more of a process question, but it's my understanding, because we did get that communication and I did ask about that. It's my understanding that the call-in center is still answering questions to the best of their ability, but they do end up sending a lot of people to the mailbox ultimately. The SBR mailbox to send to ask their questions. But it is still working and still operating.
Okay, so they can still call the hotline and talk to a live person.
9:27 this morning, what I've been told.
I want to make sure, because you're cutting in and out. I don't know if anybody else was having that technical issue, but so they are still accepting phone calls through the hotline and answering questions live, person to person.
That is correct. That's what I've been told.
Okay. And the list that you're going to send to us regarding the 57 businesses in District 3, will the list also include those that have applied and been told they're not in good standing? What will that list entail that you will send?
So I have a list right now of all of the applicants who have been mailed checks out of the door. I will also and can also get you the list of applicants that have received the notice of awards so far. And we should be, with this new batch that I was just alerted to this morning, we should be sending you that next batch of applications to approve as well. Now, if I'm hearing you correctly, you still haven't received the breakdown of all of the other applicants and why they had been denied. Is that correct? Okay, yeah,
Yes.
so we should be able to get that to you as well. I'm
Okay.
sorry you haven't gotten that yet, because yeah, we should be able to get all that to you.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Days, do you have any questions?
Yes, and it's not, I don't know if it's necessarily a question, but I did want to reiterate the fact that there needs to be someone that on this call or someone that we can talk to get direct information and access to our questions. I'm not sure if that is you, Cora, or who, but we need someone here that can absolutely make a decision as we go forward in making these requests. I don't feel that you probably have the authority to say, yes, we will spend $1 million here, $1 million there, and you may. I'm just not aware of that. But it's cumbersome when we have asked over and over for information and we have not received it. And we're still to this day asking for information. We are responsible to our constituents, and initially we were given the 2.7 million to make sure that those disbursements were to the businesses that were eligible for to receive those. So I want to reiterate again, I can't tell you how many times this has this question has been posed. So I need to know a person that I can call and absolutely get a definitive answer about any of this. And that's where my quandary lies. So take that to whoever needs to know it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a major concern for me as we're trying to make sure that these folks get what they need. It seems to be an administrative nightmare. That's putting it politely. Thank you.
Thank you.
And one last, can I add something to Councilwoman Days?
Yes, absolutely. Go ahead, Councilman Fitch.
And I agree, Councilwoman Days. And really what I was wondering on this call today is, where is Ms. Brinkley? Is she still involved in this process or not?
I'm not sure if she's on. I can't tell you, but she remains an advisor. But you know, what I would say is that we, and even to answer your question, Senator, or at least attempt to, I think we are and have gotten through the sort of policy decisions that needed to be made and were necessary to be made about a lot of the funding, about kind of where that was going to go, just in terms of priorities, those sorts of things. So like I said, policy sorts of decisions. And as we continue to make sort of the next round of decisions regarding the amount of money that's not been allocated yet, or regarding money that might have been reserved and not yet allocated, we continue to get policy advice and feedback from all of our volunteers, including Cindy Brinkley, Deb Patterson. Kathy Raymer has actually been a lot more involved lately, because we're now, for a lot of the policy decisions that have been made early on, are at the process part, where we have to actually, as the councilwoman mentioned at the very beginning, we have to actually execute the policy decisions that have been made. And so let's see if I can pull it up here just to, as a reminder for folks, that we've got the team that is responsible for, that is doing the actual administrative work right now. And so I will be happy to share that with everyone, again, just as a reminder, so that you can kind of see all of the different departments and the areas that are involved, and the folks that are working through the process of executing the policy and getting the money out of the door. So I will be sure to include that again in the follow-up information that I send to you.
Are you talking about the org chart
Yes,
in the
and so, yeah,
hierarchy?
so,
Because
right,
yeah, we've seen that before,
right,
and
yeah.
but that still does not get me to the point where there is a person that can make the final decision on how this goes. That's my concern, and I appreciate you're doing what you can. You just have not been empowered to do that, and I can understand that. So just take it to whoever needs to be taken to. Thank you.
Any other questions? Chairwoman Clancy, anything from you? Okay. Anyone else?
Thank you.
Wow, might this be our shortest oversight meeting in a while? Before we move on, though, Councilwoman Days, do you want to talk about your resiliency plan today, or at least tee it off for a conversation that we will have about the Muni League request in a few weeks?
Right. We can, I can do a little bit of that because basically it's a lot of what I've probably previously said, but we're really just trying to make sure that we get the resources out of the door to the people that really need it. And when you talk about the small business, many of these folks are teetering on non-existence. And so we've been going through this since March, and we need to it needs to be moved in my mind exponentially to get this stuff out. But additionally, we want to make sure that we have these kinds of programs to help our munis. Many of the munis, small businesses are in munis. They depend on that to make sure that they stay somewhat above board. But we need to make sure that these are programs in the pipeline so that we're just not starting from scratch every time that we come up with a new idea. So we want to make sure that we have, again, I mentioned about the communication, about all the programs that we have and we're trying to put forward. We need to make sure that we have a communication plan in place to make sure that happens. A lot of that could be through the munis. They are basically in touch with a lot of the businesses in their areas. And so we need to make sure that there is some kind of a communication plan so that we don't have to depend on word of mouth, or did they get the news, or did they go on the website, or things like that, because many of them may not have that opportunity. So the other thing that with the smaller munis, that we're looking at the uncertainty of our businesses, the uncertainty of how our constituents are being handled in many of these areas. So a lot of that is what we're really trying to do. Again, I mentioned the fact that having someone to be appointed or directed, that you are accountable to this accountability committee, that there is a go-to person that we can look to get the kinds of resources and answer the questions that we need. We don't all can wait until we get to these meetings, because there are concerns, that there are concerns before we get to these meetings. And so we need to be able to have someone do that. So that's basically it in a nutshell of how we doing this, going through our municipals, because that is another level of government, that it exists as it is, but we want to make sure that when we do that we have the requisite information to give them so that they can pass that along to their constituencies. So we are still in the process of fine-tuning this resilient cover. And we'll be getting more of that information to you, Madam Chair, for your approval and dissemination, if that is your desire.
Yes, it is. And in fact, I think that's a really good way to tee up our next meeting. And I'll get to public comment in just a moment before we wrap the meeting. But we aren't going to meet again until August 11th because we have next week is our off week, and then we are on recess the following week. But on August 11th, I think it would be really helpful for us to have a more in-depth conversation about the legalities surrounding the municipal league request, as well as some kind of disparity conversation. It might be good to get Molly back on the line for that. And I think we should all really think about this ongoing public health, humanitarian, and economic rescue crisis that we have before us, and finding ways that we can help our municipalities through those buckets as opposed to writing blank checks to them. I do want to support the municipalities. I want to support St. Louis County, but my priority as the chair of this oversight committee is saving people's lives and ensuring that our people are fed, have homes, and the ability to continue on with their lives. And I think that that should be our priority going forward, and finding ways to accomplish all of our goals should be top of mind. And so, Cora, I'll connect with you later and we can figure out who the right people are to present on these topics and how we might want to approach this conversation. But I do think that that should be the big bulk of our August 11th meeting.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
This is Hazel Irby. I had a request, and I didn't have a copy of the agenda in front of me, so I wasn't quite sure when I needed to do this. If you don't mind, I'd like to read a copy of a memo that I sent out requesting funds for DEI in regards to what you were just speaking of, the disparities in our community.
Yes.
Is that okay?
Please. By all means.
Okay. I'm requesting that the CARES Act funding be utilized to conduct the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion's equity audit, workforce disparity study, and the disparity study as well. I've shared this proposal with the county executive, and he's expressed to me that he is in full support. As director of DEI and a member of the CARES Act leadership team, I've seen and heard firsthand the pre-existing inequities that exist in St. Louis County become even more apparent as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Inequities in pay, healthcare, general resources, business opportunities, education, and basic human treatment have plagued the culture of the county, its residents, and its employees for far too long. We must protect our most vulnerable communities at all costs, and it is my hope that the audit and disparity studies will not only provide detailed insight into our past and present issues, but serve as a catalyst for substantial changes in our region. I'm asking that you consider this, and if you have any questions, you can give me a call, talk to me or my office, my deputy Fran Wiggins, as well as Darlene Reed.
Thank you so much, Ms. Irby. Can you please make sure that I have a copy of that letter, and I'll make sure that it gets to the rest of the committee and the council writ large, and we will add this to our agenda for August 11th.
Yes, we've sent you a copy as well as the council members. Thank
Great.
you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your hard work on this.
Thank you.
All right, Diane. Oh, questions? Anyone before we move? Yeah.
If I may, Madam Chair, this isn't a question just so much as a comment. I really appreciate how cumbersome. I mean, I'm hearing how cumbersome and how technical and how bureaucratic the process is to get a lot of these checks out, whether it's for humanitarian support, economic relief, so on and so forth. And I know that that is frustrating because we are in a crisis and people need relief as soon as possible. However, I also know that we have to be very, very careful with the lifeline that we have received from the federal government. And we have to be careful up front so that we don't get in trouble later with misusing the money or mismanaging the money, because I think we could be in an even more grave situation should it be found that we weren't good stewards of that money, and we could potentially have to pay some of that money back. And so I recognize that we are all, like I said, frustrated with how long it is taking to get some of these resources deployed. However, I know it is for good reason, and I want to recognize that. and how much, the forces sort of upstream over county government, whether that be the state or the federal government, really are having an impact, a negative impact, I would say, on us being able to respond in some ways. So we are hamstrung in many ways, and I appreciate all of the care and due diligence that we are taking in St. Louis County with our federal relief money.
Thank you so much. Any other comments or questions before we move to public comment? All right, Diane, I think the floor is yours.
Okay, Madam Chair, we have one public comment this morning from Theodis Brown. This comment reads, question on issue of being able to serve on this committee. Has the Voting Right Act of 1965 been complied with here on allowance of minority and people of color addressed on the committee composition of Afro-American Citizenship 2020, since main victims here as sufferers deemed people of color, population in North County venue, my township has highest affected rate due Black Lives Don't Matter in my neck of the woods as records speak for themselves. As question and political comment to wit, 2020 year. P.S. How many people of color appointed to this committee from just my township alone? And that is the end of his comments, Madam Chair.
Though I don't usually respond to the public comments, this time I will. 2/3 of this committee is comprised of African American women, and all three of us represent North County. And so I feel very good about the makeup of this committee. And with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Madam Chair.
And I will second that. Oh, Councilwoman Gray, are you back? All right. Just in time. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you all and have a great day.